shit.
There you go. All this for a child who isn't even here.
What the hell do...
You ungrateful, selfish wretch! You come into my house! You lay your filthy man-hands on my daughters! And now you even try to steal my property! How dare you! Rest while you can! Because I will hunt you, and I will break you!
It's been less than a year since Resident Evil Village was revealed to the world. Back then, its apparent themes of vampires and werewolves and other fantasy creatures had fans a little bit unsure as to how it would all complement an already busy world lore filled with walking undead, endless scientific experimentation, and the worst case of mold you have ever seen. But it's safe to say that in recent months, those worries have been replaced by curiosity, excitement, and a whole lot of thirst. Was it all worthwhile? Where does Resident Evil go from here? Let's find out in our review. Mild spoiler warning. Although we won't be going into any story specifics, there is some new footage here, so be mindful if you're looking to go into the game totally fresh.
Where are you going, little one? Bullets cannot harm.
My name? It's Ethan. Ethan Winters.
Capcom was surprisingly generous with revealing a fair amount of Resident Evil Village's plot prior to the game's launch, via trailers and multiple playable demos. It's a direct sequel to Resident Evil 7, set a few years after the ending to that game. Having survived the events of Dulvey, Louisiana, Ethan Winters and his wife Mia have relocated to Europe in order to start fresh with their baby daughter Rosemary, or Rose for short. However, in the first few minutes of the game, their peace is shattered when Chris Redfield of all people turns up, shoots Mia, and abducts Ethan and Rose. The transport Ethan is being carried in crashes, and all of a sudden he's unceremoniously dumped in the village, where he's got to try and track down Rose before she falls victim to some, well, shady ceremonies. Unfortunately for Ethan, there is a lot going on in this village. The residents all worship a mysterious figure they lovingly refer to as Mother Miranda, who, according to them, up until just a few days before, kept the villagers safe from the monsters that live close by. But now, the forest is overrun with lycans, vampires that reside in a nearby castle are claiming their share of victims, and the other lords of 4 ancient houses are also, well, not really behaving themselves either. So, in short, cue a lot of strange goings on.
No.
In terms of gameplay, not a lot has changed with Resident Evil Village since RE7. Ethan still has the usual mix of weaponry, an assortment of knives, handguns, explosives, shotguns, and eventually some more exotic additions to his arsenal that he can modify or upgrade as the game progresses. Handy for him, he can also craft supplies, including first aid meds, ammo, mines, and other recipes he can unlock as time goes on. He's aided in this by a character known only as the Duke, a friendly merchant who shows up when you need him most and has a selection of good things on sale, stranger. He also offers weapon modifications, will buy anything valuable you've managed to pick up on your travels, with minimal questions asked, and can also cook the odd recipe from meat you've harvested from animals slaughtered on or around the village. Again, thankfully, asking not too many questions about where your meat was sourced from. Turning over the ingredients for these recipes net you one-time unlocks for permanent stat boosts, like Ethan's max health, movement speed, and ability to guard against damage. Guarding has a slightly increased focus here compared to RE7 incidentally, and Ethan can now also barricade doors when under attack from Lycan hordes. Though this feature, despite likely being a nod to a similar mechanic in Resident Evil 4, isn't utilised nearly as much as we suspected it would be. In fact, and unfortunately, this is a sentiment that runs throughout Resident Evil Village, from its gameplay features to its character and story elements. It often feels like it doesn't make full use of its most intriguing story beats and locales, preferring to whiz through the plot at lightning pace sometimes. There are very few moments where you're invited to just soak up the atmosphere and feel Ethan's dread run through you. And actually, in all, Resident Evil Village is a lot less scary than RE7. It has its moments of scares, of course, and some absolutely stunningly grotesque visuals to go along with them. But in general, Village prefers to keep the action moving with lots of shootouts and explosions, rather than have you creeping around a quietly rotting house with only some creaking floorboards for company. We had gotten some measure of the enemies featured in Village prior to the game's launch, of course, but meeting them all face to face confirms that the core spirit of Village is more akin to the often camp nature of earlier Resident Evil titles, rather than many of the purer horror moments of RE7. That will be good news for some and bad news for others, depending on what you really want out of an RE game. For our part, we absolutely revelled in some of Village's more outrageous moments. But if we're honest, we could have done with a few more genuine scares overall. It probably won't surprise any fans to say that Resident Evil Village clearly owes quite a debt to Resident Evil 4, where it takes a lot of inspiration from. The setting, the merchant character, who actually references RE4's iconic merchant as a friend of his, the inventory management, and the general balance between action and puzzle solving are all reminiscent of the game that was arguably one of the greatest turning points in Resident Evil history. This also applies to some of its more outlandish boss designs, and a slow slide into a more action-heavy second half, where puzzle solving and exploration take a back seat to some rather bullet-spongy sequences. This won't be to everyone's tastes, and it's just a shame that Resident Evil Village squanders and wraps up some of its best ideas early on, leaving the player with what feels like its least developed concepts towards the end of the game. In truth, most of RE Village's characters are given very little thought or development beyond their narrative function, which is just such a shame when the entire concept of the village and its extended lore is so ripe for storytelling. Perhaps much of this is down to the restricted conditions under which a not insignificant portion of Village will have been developed. You can feel this in some areas and cutscenes more than others, when a series of still images stands in for an important cutscene, for example. And as was kind of the case with Resident Evil 7, a lot of the outstanding questions players will have about the story by the end of the game are hastily answered via item descriptions and notes, cobbled together and found in a single room. But although it feels like there is more gunplay in general in Resident Evil Village, we wouldn't say that this is reflected in the difficulty, which is gentle for the most part on standard, save for the odd boss fight where there are noticeable spikes. Some areas you'll barely have to fire a single shot, others will drain your ammo reserves down to almost nothing. As is always the case with Resident Evil inventory management, you'll need to prepare and conserve as you go, and just maybe have a couple of saves stored on your nearby typewriter, just in case. Look, if it sounds like we're being harsh on RE Village, it is only because we had high expectations for this one. We were excited and we went in fully conscious of any initial misgivings. And Ethan Winters remains a pretty dull protagonist. A lot of Resident Evil lore remains needlessly complex and convoluted. There are still sequences and boss fights relying too much on split-second trial and error that kill excitement and momentum dead in its tracks. It feels like many of the memes and theories that have sprung up around the game spend more time on the background and the lore than the game itself does. And yet, despite falling short on a few fronts, we still enjoyed our time in Village. It's frequently fun and inventive. It looks consistently stunning. Whether you're investigating a crumbling shack, playing hide-and-seek in an opulent gilded castle, or staggering through waist-high swamps. The village may be surrounded on all sides by vast mountains and impenetrable forests, but you'd be missing out not to see the wood for the trees in what is a fairly short, we clocked the main campaign at just shy of 9 hours, but very enjoyable ride. This is popcorn gaming at its finest. Yes, the plot is often nonsensical and there are areas that feel a bit of a slog to get through, but all of Village and its surrounding areas are lavishly designed, enticing to explore, and the time spent with many of its central characters are memorable, if fleeting. If you go in expecting huge things of this title, of innovative, never-before-seen gameplay, of shocking twists and revelations that will rock Resident Evil lore to its core, in all honesty, you might come away disappointed. But embrace Resident Evil Village for the silly, schlocky, not-so-scary adventure that it is, and you'll likely have a great time. Definitely could have used more stomping from sexy certain vampire ladies though. Did I say that out loud? Whoops. Oh well. There's always the next one. Right, Capcom?
Lycans and gentlemen, we thank you for waiting. And now let the games begin!
If you enjoyed this video, look out for more Resident Evil Village videos coming to our channel very, very soon. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any. While you wait, here's a selection of videos featuring sexy vampires. Fair warning, the thirst is very, very real. Leave a like if you enjoyed this review, and thanks for watching. Bye!
5, 4, 3, 2, 1,